Look at us, smiling, dancing, laughing, floating in this circle of life and culture. Look at our faces behind the smiles. See our past, our history, the feathers, the drum, the color, the beat. Can you see? Can you hear? We offer what was left to us, to you. Our lands are gone. Our homes gone. Our way of life gone. The buffalo, the deer, the wolf, the eagle, they're almost gone. What is left? Our language, our religion, our customs, our will to live, our indomitable spirit, our grace, our laughter, our pride, all that is left, we offer you. We offer it freely, like we offered our land all those years ago. This time, please, take it, savor it, cherish it, and then share it. If you do that, then it will never fade away, and then neither will we.
My name is David Wolfsrobe. I'm a Native American flute performer and an educator on the history of the Native American flute. The prose that you just heard was authored and narrated by Ron Colomb, a Lakota from the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. The thoughts and images conveyed in this poem have deep meaning for me as a preservationist of the legacy of the grandfather flute, because, as a Native American, I am deeply concerned about the fading away of the traditional artifacts and customs of our native peoples and their cultures. One of my elders points out that non-native people have been here on this continent for over 500 years, and yet they know very little about who we are. I think with this instrument, sharing its beauty and its intricacy to non-native people breaks that whole stereotype that we were just dumb Indian people sitting on a rock grunting. Native Americans are not like we're portrayed in Hollywood movies. We weren't all about war, killing, and violence. We created things of beauty, such as the flute. We were, and still are, loving, spiritual beings who treat Mother Earth as sacred. Our families are close-knit. We value the wisdom of our elders, and we cherish our family and tribal traditions. I was taught in 1984 by a fourth-generation Blackfeet flute maker in the art of making the Plains flute in the traditional way. I studied with my elder for over 5.5 years. The grandfather flute is a name we've given to the flute from the Great Plains, pre-European conquest. Grandfather flute just means the old original flute to distinguish it from the modern versions of the flute that was created in the early 1900s by a group of American musicians. The difference between the two is that, unlike its modern counterpart, the grandfather flute is tuned to a natural minor scale. It is tuned to nature, birds, and the animal world. Anytime you hear the flute played accompanied with an electric guitar, a piano, modern drums, symphony orchestra, music with a rhythm, or with instruments commonly played with sheet music, it is not the grandfather flute. It is the modern flute that we call the Native American concert-tuned flute. American musicians converted the grandfather flute from its natural pentatonic scale to the Western pentatonic scale. The way our people originally made the grandfather flute was dependent on the flute maker using his body measurements, the length of his arm, the width of his hand, the roundness of his index finger, on and on and on. From a personal point of view, what I see different, the positives and the negatives of contemporary Native American flute music. First, the positives. You have to look, at least this instrument just didn't drop off the face of the earth. When people hear the contemporary version with that Western pentatonic scale and the symphonies and the guitars and the pianos, at least they're still hearing the remnants of this instrument. The negatives of it is if it was left as just the contemporary, nobody would ever know what came before. And also, in my personal opinion, I think in this modern world we tend to do that a lot with not only the flute but with many other things. We forget where something came from and we focus and we pay attention to this modern, and then when somebody does come up with, for instance, in this case with the flute, and you hear the traditional, the old style sounds of this instrument, people go, ooh, what's that? A lot of the contemporary Native American flute performers who are native and they don't talk about the old ways, in my opinion, they're doing this instrument and our people a great injustice. Now, there are more non-native native flute players than there are native flute players in the recording industry. And a lot of them don't even know the history of this instrument. And so if they're going to do this instrument justice and respect, they need to learn and they need to speak about where this instrument came from and bring the audience into this modern world. I don't see as many people interested in preserving the culture as much as there are those who want to move forward in this modernization. So my elder always told me, somebody's got to stay behind and water the tree. It's very important to me to listen to what the elders have left for us, and the dream that they had, that they foreseen for our future. Somebody's got to keep those dreams alive, and I think I've just taken it upon myself, in this case with this instrument and the gifts that I was given, to do that. The Native American flute was used in many different ways, depending on the tribes who played it. For instance, the Great Plains tribes used it as a courtship instrument. The flute clans of the Pueblo culture in the Southwest, they used it primarily for ceremonial purposes. The Eastern Woodlands tribes, such as the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and Creek, used it primarily as an instrument of pleasure and a form of entertainment. There are only a few native grandfather flute makers actively engaged in making flutes in the traditional way. I am one of those few. There are non-native flute makers out there who have picked up somehow, probably from us describing how we make these instruments. However, my elder always seen this as being somewhat disrespectful because they do not ask our permission to copy our techniques. He was always a preservationist of the traditional ways of this instrument and wanted to keep it all native. There are a lot of Native American flute musicians out there, but there are probably over 3 times as many non-native flute players as native flute players. This is what most people hear when they listen to Native American flute music, especially in the New Age realm. They hear non-native people playing flutes. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a good thing or bad thing, but most people think that every time they hear a Native American flute, it is automatically a native person playing it, and that is not always true. The traditional way to play the grandfather flute outside of courtship is for the flute player to close his eyes, because for that moment our bodies are here physically, but our spirits are wherever we want to go. We can be soaring with eagles over the Grand Canyon, running with elk, or just taking a leisurely stroll through a mountain pass. What we are doing when we close our eyes We are playing what our minds are seeing. It's like being on our own personal vision quest. Because there are so many nations throughout the Great Plains, the origin stories of the grandfather flute vary. For instance, generally, the origin story is a romantic one. It starts with a young boy and a young girl, and somewhere in the story is a woodpecker that teaches this young man to play the flute. The story that my elder taught me is that this boy was so in love with this young girl that he went to see the medicine man for answers. And the medicine man told him what he should do. So this young man set out on his journey. He was told to walk and keep walking until he found his answer. The young man wasn't sure what all this meant, but he set out on his journey anyway. The first day, he walked and walked and walked. There came a time when he got hungry, so he was told when this happened to shoot an arrow into the air, and he did. He followed the arrow to the spot it had landed and found that he had killed a deer. He prepared the deer in the proper way and feasted upon it that night. He did this for 4 days. On the 4th day, when he goes to get the arrow, there are 2 elk people who approach him. In the Plains Nations, we call these people elk dreamers. They carry the love medicine. The elk dreamers tell the young boy to not have any fear, that he will be able to win the heart of the young girl he loves. At the same time, he hears this beautiful melody coming from above. He looks up and sees a woodpecker who has chiseled holes in a cedar branch. As the wind blows across these holes, the woodpecker hops from one hole to the other, creating the melody the young boy hears. The woodpecker breaks the branch off, hands it to the elk dreamers, and they play a melody upon it. Then they give the young man the flute and teach him how to play it. Once the boy has been taught to play the flute, the elk dreamers disappear into the woods. The young boy then returns to his village and plays the melody he learned on the flute that the elk dreamers had given to him. Hearing the enchanting melody, the young girl approaches him. And after she approached him, to make a long story short, preparations were made for their wedding. That represents the first time the flute was used as a courtship instrument. Each nation, because of where they are located geographically, has a different story to tell about the origin of their flutes. Even though the stories vary, they are all beautiful and have a special meaning to each culture. There are basically 2 types of flutes in the Southwest. The first is the fingered whistle. These date back around 300 AD and made of bone, mostly eagle wing bone. These fingered whistles have been found from Mesoamerica, which is present-day Mexico, as far north as central and southern Arizona. The second flute is the ancestral Pueblo flutes. The oldest known ancestral Pueblo flutes were uncovered in the Prairie Rock district of Arizona in 1931 by Earl H. Morris. Archaeologists date these findings at Broken Flute Cave from 1620 to 1670 AD. Though 2 of the flutes were broken, each of the flutes had 6 holes and were rim blown. But 40 years before that, another archaeologist, George Pepper, was studying the Pueblo Benito site in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. In a very small room at Pueblo Benito, designated Room 33, a discovery was made of several beautiful end-blown flutes. Pueblo Benito is the largest dwelling in Chaco Canyon, and archaeologists believe that this amazing place was inhabited between 828 and 1126 AD. In the 17 and 1800s, the U.S. government confiscated these grandfather flutes. The reason for this is that I don't believe they understood anything about these instruments. They probably thought we were using them for a ceremony, which you have to think, back then they were trying to stop our ceremonies. From what I understand, they really didn't even ask what we were using them for, and even if they would have, if we would have told them that we were using them for a courtship instrument, they probably would not have believed our people anyway. Back in what we call the reservation era, the 17 and 1800s, on the Great Plains, at that time the U.S. Cavalry, the soldiers had made it, to the Great Plains. And like anything in European history, if they don't understand something, if they're afraid of it, the first thing they do is take it. And that's what happened with a large portion of these grandfather flutes. Between the 17 and 1800s, over 1,750, from what I understand, were confiscated from the Plains nations. Most of them, what remains of them today, are housed in the Smithsonian Institute. A lot of people ask why women, or if women ever traditionally played the flutes. And the answer to that is no, women traditionally never did play the flutes. But before I make anybody upset and sound male chauvinistic, there is an explanation to that. It's all based on the balance of feminine and masculine. The flute is a very feminine instrument. Now, some people would say, well, if it's feminine, then a woman should play it. But women don't need the feminine medicine or the feminine energy of the flute because they're life givers. Their spirit level is at a higher level. This is the way it was taught to me. Men, on the other hand, throughout centuries, we have went to war, we have hunted, we have killed. And so in a kind of way, this is seen as bringing the spirit level down. So us men have to kind of do more to balance that feminine and masculine energy or medicine, and the flute is one tool for that. I know traditional women who won't walk anywhere near the flutes because it's too much medicine, or lack of better explanation, too much energy for them. They don't need more feminine. From all of this, I do tell people the flute saved my life. And I'm not just talking about just the flute. I'm wrapping all my friends, my elders, everybody. The flute is a symbol to me for all those people who basically saved my life. And that's why I've decided to dedicate my life to the preservation of the grandfather flute. It took me from a very bad road to a good road. And where that all began for me was during my high school football years. I think it started before I really got into the drug and alcohol addiction. It started with the use of steroids in high school, and one thing led to another. I needed more, and I started following in you could say ancestral footsteps with the alcohol, and then it was both drugs and alcohol, and I was spiraling downward, very, very, very quickly. People ask me all the time, one of the greatest questions I get is what drives me, why am I so passionate about the grandfather flute? When you put it in the big picture, the preservation of this instrument in its traditional ways is very, very, very important to the fabric or the tapestry of what I call, the Native American weaving. If you take a beautiful tapestry and you clip just one strand of that tapestry, what does it do? It starts to come apart. So as far as the grandfather flute, that's my drive behind it. The preservation of the culture itself. In this modern day, people see our Native American culture as what they see in the movies, Hollywood. We're stoic. We're stoic Indians with walking around with a temper and an anger and wanting to shoot the white man. That's not what it's all about. We're human beings, and not many people know who we are. So this grandfather flute, not only preserving it, but it's also a tool to also show people another side of our culture that you don't see in Hollywood movies. So it's also helping to introduce and saying, hey, look, we're human beings just like you are. This is our story.